In the spring of 1951, General Douglas MacArthur pressed for a nuclear strike against Manchuria. What if President Harry Truman had yielded to this extreme demand? Instead, Truman chose to contain the conflict and fire MacArthur, removing him from command and making a decisive turning point in the Korean War. Thus, the war averted the specter of large-scale atomic devastation and followed the course we know today. But at what cost, and under what sacrifices? Replacing MacArthur was General Matthew Ridgway, entrusted with a more cautious yet equally resolute strategy. Meanwhile, the front began stabilizing around the 38th parallel, heralding the end of mobile warfare. UN forces and Sino-North Korean units now faced each other in static positions, marked by trenches, fortifications, and long coils of barbed wire. This fresh phase, often likened to World War I trench combat, proved extremely grueling. The battlefield equilibrium, along with a political desire to avoid nuclear escalation, confirmed that MacArthur's total offensive belonged to the past. The Korean War entered a costly stalemate in both resources and human lives, revealing neither side would dare spark another cataclysm. By mid-1951, it was evident this conflict would stay contained, yet protracted. In July 1951, as UN and Sino-North Korean armies faced off along a 240-kilometer front near the 38th parallel, representatives of the United States, China, and North Korea convened in Panmunjom, a village around 8 kilometers from Kaesong, to seek an armistice. On the ground, tens of thousands of soldiers fought in entrenched lines, even as negotiators strove to end a conflict that had already claimed hundreds of thousands of dead and wounded. The talks quickly revealed major sticking points. First came the precise boundary line to define the demarcation zone. Second, the fate of more than 100,000 prisoners of war, many of whom rejected forced repatriation. China and North Korea demanded the return of every POW, whereas the United States and its allies preferred voluntary repatriation. Additionally, no side wished to appear weak to domestic audiences, inflaming the already tense atmosphere at the table. Despite these negotiations, combat persisted. Casualties mounted daily along ridges and outposts, some just 30 or 40 kilometers from Panmunjom itself. The stark contrast between the battlefield's brutality and the formality of diplomatic talks slowed any progress, ensuring the path to an armistice would be long and fraught. The positional warfare, coupled with the difficulties of these discussions, would shape the following 2 years of conflict, leaving both sides locked in a costly deadlock that tested their endurance and resolve on every hill and trench across the landscape, underscoring how complex peace could ultimately be.
Did you know that most people who watch our documentaries aren't subscribed yet? If you enjoy animated maps and history, join our community. Leave a like and subscribe so you never miss the next episodes.
Throughout a roughly 240-kilometer front, at least 100 hills changed hands multiple times amid extended clashes. Over 40 large-scale operations repeatedly altered tactical maps. On one side, UN forces, led by the United States and comprising various allies. On the other, determined Sino-North Korean troops resolved to hold firm. Seizing a ridge conferred control over the surrounding valleys, vital for supply routes and strategic maneuvers. Yet every new assault ran into trenches, fortified positions, and both sides' steadfast refusal to yield ground. Among the most notorious battles were Bloody Ridge, August to September 1951, and Heartbreak Ridge, September to October 1951, both on the eastern sector. At Bloody Ridge, fighting centered on hills 983 and 924, strategic for artillery firing and observation. Its estimated UN forces, mainly American and South Korean, suffered over 2,700 losses, while Sino-North Korean casualties surpassed 15,000 killed or wounded. A few weeks later, Heartbreak Ridge focused on hills 931 and 851, with American losses near 3,700 versus over 25,000 among defenders. Conditions were dire. Monsoon rains turned slopes to mud. Mountainous terrain encouraged subterranean bunkers and tunnels, while UN forces resorted to heavy aerial bombardment, often with napalm, to flush out defenders. Despite air superiority, Sino-North Korean infantry, driven by Mao Zedong's and Kim Il-sung's political resolve, kept counterattacking and inflicted severe losses. In this setting, capturing or losing a hill might yield only a few hundred meters, yet cost thousands of lives. While preliminary armistice talks began at Panmunjom, positional warfare persisted, with unrelenting back-and-forth advances and withdrawals defining the conflict until 1953. This grueling war of attrition exposed the immense human cost exacted by each engagement. Neither side would cede a critical vantage point without a fierce fight, guaranteeing that a line measuring just a few kilometers wide would become a nightmarish arena of mud, mortar barrages, and hand-to-hand combat. By late 1951, both armies understood the front might not shift significantly, yet high command demanded ongoing pressure, turning every position into a bloody prize. In 1952, the Truman administration intensified its bombing strategy against the northern areas of the Korean Peninsula. The goal was to erode North Korea and China's productive capacities by destroying key infrastructure like bridges, dams, power plants, and industrial sites. Over 1,000 UN aircraft, mostly American, conducted large-scale incursions, causing severe damage and swelling the number of internal refugees. Cities and villages struck by raids saw essential services collapse, forcing civilians to flee to safer areas or seek makeshift shelter. This air campaign aimed to pressure Pyongyang and Beijing into accepting more favorable armistice terms. Meanwhile, the United States approached a presidential election. In November 1952, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a World War II hero, won the race, ushering in fresh perspectives. During his campaign, Eisenhower vowed to resolve the forgotten war in Korea, yet did not rule out tough measures if negotiations failed. This change at the White House also affected senior UN command. New diplomatic pressure was applied on Beijing, where fears of a potential nuclear clash were mounting. American and global public opinion, weary of a protracted and costly conflict, increasingly backed a settlement. Yet Truman's resolve to use air power as diplomatic leverage remained firm until his term's end. In 1952, this so-called hammer-from-above strategy peaked. That year alone, the U.S. Air Force launched tens of thousands of missions, dropping tons of bombs on key northern facilities. Over the entire war, it would conduct nearly 800,000 sorties, delivering around 635,000 tons of ordnance, including over 32,000 tons of napalm, a quantity surpassing that used in the entire Pacific theater during World War II. This relentless bombing campaign sought to cripple North Korea's infrastructure and political will, inching closer to negotiations, but also exacting a deep humanitarian toll. Civilian centers lay in ruins, fueling bitter resentment among survivors and shaping post-war animosities profoundly. By early 1953, the war of position had reached its peak. While Panmunjom negotiations continued in fits and starts, the front remained a chain of trenches and fortifications. The harsh 1952-53 winter made combat even more grueling, as thousands of soldiers fought in brutal sub-zero conditions. Despite intensified UN air raids and Sino-North Korean infantry offensives, the 38th parallel still marked the main dividing line with minimal territorial shifts. Amid this grinding stalemate came the Battle of Porkchop Hill, March to July 1953, emblematic of ferocious struggles over seemingly minor ridges that held immense symbolic value. Located north of Seoul, Pork Chop Hill became a focal point between American troops and Chinese forces. Every meter extracted precious lives. Estimates suggest the United States lost over 1,000 men killed, wounded, or missing, while Chinese casualties ran even higher, likely several thousand. Heavy artillery, bombing runs, and massive infantry waves underscored the brutality of a conflict that now gained virtually no ground at utterly prohibitive cost. Meanwhile, conditions for an armistice gradually matured. The United States, under President Eisenhower, increased diplomatic pressure on China, threatening further military escalation or even nuclear action should talks fail. Also central were the fates of prisoners of war, particularly those refusing to return to communist-held areas, and the precise demarcation along the 38th parallel. These issues dominated the arduous discussions. Ultimately, on July 27, 1953, the Panmunjom Armistice was signed, establishing a demilitarized zone about 4 kilometers wide near the 38th parallel. Yet no formal peace treaty ever materialized, leaving the two Koreas technically at war. This agreement halted the fighting, but never resolved the underlying divisions, ushering in an armed peace destined to endure for decades. Despite the carnage, the uneasy truce allowed both sides to regroup, signaling a painful legacy that shaped the peninsula's future. Millions had suffered 3 years of near-constant fighting, only to see borders hardly shift. In hindsight, the armistice was less a definitive solution than a tense pause that would cast its shadow over North Asia's geopolitics for generations, leaving both Koreas locked in unresolved rivalry. With the armistice signing in July 1953, the Korean peninsula remained split into 2 diametrically opposed political entities, linked only by the painful memory of 3 years of war. In the south, the Republic of Korea, initially authoritarian and backed by the United States, experienced an economic boom from the 1960s onward, gradually democratizing until the 1980s, when civilian governments were elected and full political freedoms emerged. In the north, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea developed as a Stalinist-style regime under Kim Il-sung, marked by personality cult, heavy militarization, and later, a nuclear program. Millions of families remained divided, while relations between the two Koreas stayed hostile, lacking any definitive peace treaty. The war, never formally concluded, became a suspended conflict that has shaped regional politics for decades, drawing in global actors like the United States, China, and Russia. Even now, the Korean War continues influencing geopolitical balances, revealing how profoundly those 3 years impacted the peninsula and the wider world. If these events moved or intrigued you, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming content. Have questions, doubts, or opinions to share? Drop us a comment. Your participation helps us keep exploring the pivotal turns of world history together, unveiling the crucial legacies that still echo across today's international stage. In a region haunted by memory, we can see how old fault lines endure, ensuring the Korean question remains unresolved.